Mother and Father Goose are perched high atop a high cliff in a remote part of Africa. They have a nest, and it has 5 eggs in it, and the eggs have just hatched, and all of their beautiful little goslings are coming to life in front of their eyes. But they are 3,000 feet up and 3,000 feet from food. Now, the mother and father goose put them up on that high perch because they wanted to keep the eggs from predators, to keep them safe. But now that they have hatched, the birds have to get down to get to food because the parents cannot fly up and down and up and down to bring them food. And so the parents are trying to get the little goslings to edge closer and closer and closer to that cliff. They're actually just little balls of fur and air. Beautiful, but very tiny and very light. The father goose starts flying around the cliff first because he wants to show them that it's safe. They could fly. The mother continues that effort, flying back and forth, eventually leaving the little chicks and coming back, helping them to understand that they need to take that dive. So eventually, one of them does. Bounces down the cliff. They're so light, they're so airy, they just kind of bounce back and forth between the rocks until they get to the bottom. And the mother and father are watching for each one as they get to the bottom. And they welcome them all when they finally made their trip. There is now food, and there is now new life. Today we're going to hear a story about a woman who took a mighty leap. Her name is Martha, and when we encounter her, we will find that she is very, very exasperated and worried, pacing about because her brother has died and Jesus has not come. Listen with me to her story in John 11. When Jesus arrived at Martha's house, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Jesus came, Martha said to him, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." But Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." Do you believe this? She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved, he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from death?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. For I knew you always heard me. But for the benefit of those here, I thank you for what you will do." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Martha's mighty leap began on solid ground. She was pacing back and forth in front of a tomb because she had called Jesus days before and told him that Lazarus was very ill and she needed him to be there right away. But now 3 days had passed and Lazarus had died and it was too late. And so there she was, standing in front of the tomb. Where had he gone? Why didn't he come? Well, eventually Jesus did come, and when he came, Martha gave him an exasperated cry. "If you would have been here, my brother would not have died." Now, Jesus recognized just how disturbed Martha was, but he looked past it. He was interested in beckoning Martha to the edge of that cliff where she would take her leap of faith. So Jesus said to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will not die." Martha did not quite understand what Jesus was talking about, but she did know that Jesus loved her. And she said to Jesus, "I know that God will give you anything that you ask." The part about the resurrection and the life she wasn't so sure of. But the thing she was very sure of was that Jesus could ask God to bring her brother to life. And when Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life," and described that to Martha, and then he turned to her and said, "Do you believe this?" Martha thought to herself, "Well, of course I believe that. Everybody knows that there's going to be a resurrection in the last day." But Jesus wasn't talking about the last day. He was talking about today. He was saying to her, "Martha, today, here, as I stand with you, I am the resurrection and the life." Martha wasn't quite ready for that, but she was ready to welcome Jesus. And when he said, "Do you believe this?" Martha boldly said yes, just like Mary had said yes years before when the angel came to her and asked her to have a child. Martha too said, "Let it be unto me according to your word." And that was enough for Jesus. He started for the tomb. And as he neared it, we're told that he became very, very agitated. We are told that he wept, but this was not just a few tears. This was a deep emotional upset. The tears that Jesus wept have been the subject of biblical scholars' inquiries for decades, even centuries. What did his weeping mean? The word actually translates as indignation. Jesus was angry that death had come to this place. And if we ever thought that Jesus didn't care when people die and we lose loved ones, we should be reminded of those two words, the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept because he wept. And he was furious that death had taken sway in that place that day. So he bristled and he braced himself to take on death, making it a cosmic battle right in Martha's backyard. Salvation was coming all the way home to her. Then Jesus turned to Martha and he said, "Remove the stone." Now, Martha had told Jesus yes just before that she believed, but she wasn't quite ready to take that step because she knew that if that stone was rolled away, it would stink. There would be death and the smell of death. It would fill the entire area. She wasn't ready for that. So she needed the help of the community. And the community, they rolled that stone away so that Jesus could beckon Lazarus to come out. And he did. He cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth!" And out of that tomb came what Scripture describes as a dead man, wrapped in bindings of death. And because he could not move, the community again had to be called upon to help him, to unbind the bonds of death from him so he could walk in fullness of life. Now, as we look at this story, we notice that there are things that human beings had to do to make this miracle possible. The miracle has the imprint of human hands. And how is that, you ask? Well, first of all, if we start out with Martha, at the very beginning, we are standing in front of a tomb. We have been waiting for Jesus, and now the worst has happened. Our brother has died, and Jesus still hasn't come. Now, we have a choice at that very moment, as Martha did. We can either choose to keep waiting and to keep hoping that Jesus will come, or we could go right back into our house and we could shut the door on our hope and say, that's it. Now, Martha waited. She waited and she hoped. She made that choice. You know, if she hadn't have made that choice, you have to begin to wonder if she would have missed the whole wonderful miracle, you know? Jesus might have come, but she wasn't waiting. Jesus might have opened the tomb and brought Lazarus out, and she might not have seen it. But you see, Martha had decided that she was going to wait and she was going to hope. And so she perched herself on that cliff, and she looked into the future, waiting to see just the slightest movement of a person coming toward her, her friend Jesus. Would we do that? Would we wait that long? Would we watch? That's what Martha did. She thought to herself, perhaps, that day, maybe something new might happen. Then, after Jesus came and he called Lazarus forth out of the tomb, you notice that it required people to move that stone. Jesus didn't just call Lazarus out and then Lazarus come bursting forth through the stone into the community. No, Jesus said, remove the stone. And since Martha was unwilling or unable to do so, then there were people there who did. People's hands that assisted Jesus in bringing Lazarus to life. And finally, you'll notice, as he comes forth out of the tomb, there are people again who have to help him. He is still bound up in the bonds of death, and people in the community had to unbind him so that he could walk in fullness of life. Yet again, human hands, assisted Jesus in this miracle. There is the imprint of human hands in this miracle. And it is a miracle for today. It is something not just for the day Martha waited for Jesus, but for us too. We wait for Jesus. We roll away the stones, the obstacles that keep us from his new life rushing in. We unbind the bonds of death from people who are walking in our world, bound up, unable to live fully. We do these things, and then we go to the edge of that cliff, and we think about what we're going to do. We really want to believe. We've always wanted to believe. But it's so far down, 3,000 feet. Maybe perhaps today we'll jump. Jesus keeps leading us there. He keeps wanting to go with us. We know he loves us. We know he protects us. So today perhaps we will leap into his faith and joy. And we will allow ourselves to believe and go straight into that darkness that is in front of us, that danger that we feel is the greatest danger threatening our lives, and yet is the only thing that leads to our true safety. When we leap, we learn to fly. What a day that is. We stand with Martha at the beginning of our story at a tomb, and she has her feet planted right on the ground. Martha had no way of knowing what was going to happen that day when Jesus showed up. But she did know that Jesus loved her and that Jesus would protect her no matter what happened. And something new did happen that day. It did. Martha's tomb of death became a womb of new life. Her brother rose again. And so will we.